Because when you travel, you start to appreciate things from your own culture, and you start to appreciate things from this new culture. And if you didn't have that experience, it's one of those things that it's very difficult to get otherwise. You might read about it in like a book or something. You might hear about it from a YouTube video or something, but you're not really going to internalize it the same way as if you're there experiencing the culture yourself, and seeing it. And that's when you start to really think like, oh, you know what? I didn't realize, but I really took the air quality we have here in Canada for granted, with all the smoking. Or for protests, for example, when you go to China, you're like, oh, I didn't realize that, like, that's not something everybody has a chance to do. If you go to like poor countries, you might realize that, like, oh my goodness, like the education that everybody's afforded here in Canada is like, wow, that is some top quality stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's not perfect by any means, but you start to appreciate those things more, and then you start to realize, like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here in Canada that I don't mess with, but there's a lot of stuff that you really start to think and like, wow, you just makes you appreciate everything.
Yeah, and just to bounce off of what you're saying, like definitely yes, like having these different experiences really can make you appreciate the situation that you're in your country, in your particular city. And all that, definitely. But also, it really shows you other ways of living that you just never even thought about or could think of, just because you never, you're kind of stuck in your own little bubble, having never seen that or heard about it, and just kind of witness these different ways of living. And you get very accustomed to the way you live. And yeah, one thing that could come out of that is taking the things you have for granted. But other thing is like, you don't quite realize there are other things or other ways that things could be done that might suit you even more and could actually increase the quality of your life. So one thing we talk about, and I think we should probably talk more about this on a different day, just diving into it, but like having walkable cities, having these places designed for people and for communities rather than cars, and have that kind of thing. All right. So when you're constantly in this environment, have roads all be the same, like you're talking about, you don't get to think about what it would be like to have like these more narrow roads that are just designed for people, and how living in that kind of situation could actually increase the quality of your life. And maybe that is actually what you would like. And also, you're talking about like poorer countries. I remember my experience in Cuba. I was actually there twice. I've stayed in the locals' houses, and I've also interacted with some of the communities there in these two trips. And one thing that you really appreciate in Cuba, like not even just appreciate what you have back home, but one thing that you could really appreciate and kind of learn from there is that they really make do with what they have, in the sense of like, they'll have all these old cars. They'll have these Soviet cars, and then they'll have these newer Chinese cars, and they don't get like new parts. They'll somehow make different cars from different countries, from different time periods work. Like something's broke, they'll find a way to fix it somehow. Very resourceful. If a bass string breaks, maybe they'll use a fishing wire. Like they'll find ways to deal with the situation that they're in. I mean, a lot of that has to do with the U.S. embargo and all that, but so they can't really get things just because politically the U.S. and all the power. And other thing is they can't really produce a lot of the things themselves because they are only an island country in the Caribbean. So there are a lot of limitations because of both of these reasons. But you really appreciate how resourceful people are, and how willing they are to try and find creative ways to solve their problems, and also to just find joy in the situation that they're in, when most of the outside world could look in and be like, that you really don't have much. And it really made me not only appreciate what I have back home, but also made me realize that, if I were to live here, seeing people who could live here and be happy, I could put myself in this situation. I imagine how I would react. And it made me truly realize that, like, I don't actually need all these things. And even in a very basic living condition, you could still be fulfilled. You could still find joy. You could still, live a very fulfilling life. You just need to kind of see it from a different perspective and see other people doing that for you to perhaps realize it. And knowing that you are not living in that kind of most basic condition, you actually appreciate the way you live even more. So you kind of get both sides of it. And I feel like that kind of experience is very unique. And also it really kind of grow your mindset and really broadens your perspective just because it's so unique.
100%.
Damn, yeah,
100%.
I agree.
Yeah.
And like I remember anytime, like for example, I think when I was in Mexico for a while or in the Dominican Republic, one thing that every time I go to like those countries that I kind of take for granted here in Canada is like, you can just get water right out of the tap. It's insane. There's so many places around the world that can't even do that.
Yeah.
It's one of the most basic things that everyone just has here in Canada. And like people in the States, they lose their minds in like Flint when they didn't have the drinking water, But for a lot of places, that's just reality. I don't think the drinking quality is as bad as Flint because I think Flint's water supply is just messed. But the point still stands in a lot of places, just the most basic stuff. It's not there. It really makes you appreciate the really basic stuff. And it makes you realize that like, hey, a lot of these luxuries that, we don't see as luxuries, we're actually really well off here in Canada.
And they are actually luxuries.
Or just in general, it makes you,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Like a dishwashers, drying machines, all that stuff. Like so much of the world doesn't have access to that. It's insane. Really puts it into
and even like, well, let me say this first. Like even in the States, when I went down to like Anaheim to LA, the drinking water quality from the tap, like I wouldn't do it. It's just so much worse than here in Canada, especially BC. The water in BC and Vancouver area is amazing. So even like in other well-developed countries, like you still get you notice these little differences, and you could even from that really appreciate it.
Is that like is that based off of like the numbers? Like have you seen the numbers for it? Because a lot of it is probably just how familiar you are with the water too. Like I'm sure if you've grown up in a lot of those places, if the drinking water is drinkable, you might find our water unpalatable.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know.
I didn't like it, and I actually looked up, and a lot of people didn't seem to like the water from that area, including some locals. So your point might be true, but in this case, I don't think it applies.